I didn't really want to make a card game. It just kind of felt like when I was suggesting these things for Magic, and people kind of like got really mad at me. There was a lot of outrage about it. It just, all of a sudden, I just had a core of a game that could be good. I don't look back at my time with Magic in regret. There was a moment in all of it which helps me with pretty much every situation that I'm dealing with now. Magic has the essence of something that needs to exist, and it just hasn't been like fully utilized, and let's see if we can make that happen.
Meet Zan Syed. Zan was a high-level Magic competitor and the captain of Team Lotus Box. Chances are, if you follow competitive Magic at all over the past couple of years, Zan's name would be on your radar. But then COVID happened, along with a few controversies surrounding Zan, and he disappeared. Now Zan's back, and he's channeling all of his energy towards making a new card game that builds on everything he feels is wrong with Magic the Gathering. This is the Humans of Magic interview with Zan Syed. Hey Zan, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How's it going, James?
It's going good. Like, we were talking before the recording, and I'm just excited to talk to you. I was just thinking the other day, what is Zan up to recently? You've always been like super nice to me, very generous, and I just wanted to basically know how you're doing. Like, what are you up to recently? Maybe we'll just get right into it. Like, how is life?
Life's good. I was living in LA during the pandemic, and I moved to Atlanta in October. And I think this is the happiest I've been since probably, 2019. Yeah.
Since pre-COVID.
Since pre-COVID, yeah.
Dang. Okay, so what is your favorite thing about Atlanta? Like, just environment-wise?
Well, I grew up here. I would say, the weather's fantastic. A little bit more humid than LA, but you actually get all of the seasons. Surprisingly enough, I did miss an actual winter and rain, which I didn't probably experience twice in 2 years when I was in LA. So, and then of course, cost of living in Atlanta is so much less than LA.
Oh, dude. Yeah. I was in California recently, even just traveling, like just staying in Airbnbs.
Yeah.
I don't know how people live in LA. I mean, everyone has different standards, but it's like you can't. Yeah, I won't go on my rant, but it's up there in terms of prices and yeah.
Yeah, it was insane. I mean, yeah, I basically stopped driving. I got an electric bike while I was out there, so I was just driving that around because the gas prices were also ridiculous. So Atlanta's just a much better place if you are in a developmental stage of anything. Plus taxes. We don't even have to say anything.
I was only in Atlanta one time. I think it was pre-COVID. I think it was GP Atlanta or something. It was like a legacy GP actually. So I don't know if did you ever go to that? I don't know. It was the only time I went to Atlanta.
I have been to a couple of legacy GPs, but that feels like a super long time ago because at some point they just made all the Atlanta GPs into limited, and nobody here likes limited. So
that's got to be pre-COVID. It's got to be pre-COVID because I didn't leave mainland China for during the entire COVID era until recently, right?
Oh
when
my
I told you I went to California. So that was definitely a long time ago. We stayed at this Airbnb that was super nice. Like it was like a elementary school that got converted into a residence, and it was super nice inside. But the Uber driver was super freaked out when we got her to pick us up and take us to the convention center because she was like, "Why are you guys living there?" Like I guess it was like a really bad part of the city or something. It's like she was like, "You guys should not be there," but it was fine inside.
I've seen videos of that, but I've never actually stayed in that. I would love to see pictures of that. It would be a dream to be in the basketball court. Just wake up, just shoot some hoops.
Yeah, it's like a YouTube house, but only we rented it for a little while. But yeah, like, are you a nightclub person? Are you like doing social stuff? Like, what are you doing around Atlanta? I mean, just when you're not doing your grind, that is.
Yeah, not much of a club person. I mean, I feel like that was college. I love to eat. So I love going to nice restaurants. Um, Yesterday I went to an Indian restaurant. I don't actually go to Indian restaurants that often, but it's like a really unique one. It's called chai pani, which converts to uh, tea water. But yeah, it's it's like an Americanized Indian restaurant. So how do I describe it? It's like, have you ever had pani puri?
I no, I probably not. I mean, I don't know what that is. So maybe I've had it, but I just never knew the name. That
It's
could be.
like it's like a hollow chip ball where you like make a hole in it, and
Okay.
then they put like chickpeas, onions, and like curry water into it, and then and then you are supposed to eat it in one bite. It's supposed to be like a little spicy, but yeah, it's like a traditional Indian street food thing. And so they have like a professional person who sits there and makes it for you. And you can't really get that anywhere in the US. So they like kind of make like a homely experience. So I love going there. Plus they have like the best lunch buffet ever. So if you're ever in Atlanta, it's kind of like at a hipster place called Decatur in Atlanta. So, but besides that, I'm currently dating someone, and so yeah, we're both foodies. So we've been just going to a bunch of cool restaurants.
Nice, nice. Did you meet them in Atlanta or?
I actually met him in New York. I was visiting my sister while I was living in LA, and then I had a plan to come visit my parents in Atlanta. And so I just matched with them on a dating app, and we hit it off. And then they were like, they live in Atlanta. And so when I came down to Atlanta, we hung out some more. And yeah, the
So
rest
it's
is
pretty
history.
serious.
It's pretty serious.
Nice, nice. I'm happy for you.
Thanks.
And I never had a chance to ask you. So are you of Indian descent? Is that your
Pakistani. So
Pakistani,
yeah,
the neighbor?
the
Yeah.
neighbor. Yeah. So my dad was born in India, but like it was like pre-partition. So it's like the migration from India to Pakistan, right? Because there was like it's kind of like the US's civil war, right? If the North and South had if the South had actually won, that's kind of the result that would have happened, and that was like India and Pakistan. So
Okay.
so I'm kind of like in a in between area. So where I definitely have always identified as Pakistani, but I'm definitely interested in going to India, which I'm planning to do within the month, is and explore my Indian roots.
Awesome. So I guess three worlds: India, Pakistan, U.S. You're born in the U.S. or?
Yeah, I was born in LA.
Oh,
And
right, as you said.
and then I grew up here in Atlanta.
Very nice, very nice. So yeah, what man, this is like a big question already, but what I mean, have you felt differences in terms of like the climate of living in the US, like basically over the past couple of years, just in terms of maybe how you're treated or how you feel the environment is around you?
Mm, yeah. I feel like it's pretty normal when like you're just like living here, but I feel like it becomes apparent on the hostility whenever I travel outside the US, which I used to do quite often before the pandemic. Like I say, yeah, I traveled like every month. If it wasn't a Magic tournament, I was still traveling with my parents. Like I had a trip at the end of 2019 where I ended up going to Saudi Arabia. I went to the UK. I went to Japan. I just like in my time off and when I'm going to tournaments and stuff, or I used to go to tournaments, just always travel. But it's like I remember when I went to Japan, I ended up finding this troll Trump doll. This was when Trump was still president. This was the first time I actually went, and that's kind of when the outside kind of lets you know how the rest of the world feels about it, and you kind of can figure out how you feel about it. But when you're in it, you're just like, that's just how it is, you know?
Yeah. So you're basically on U.S. soil or on American soil, things are pretty, like, they feel pretty normal. But when you're outside, then you start to feel other things, or other people make you feel other things, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Or if I'm engaging with Twitter too much, like Magic Twitter can really make you feel terrible about the world at times.
Well, they make you feel terrible about everything, honestly. So that's pretty fair.
So once I learned to disengage from that and like delete the Twitter app and only go on Twitter when I get on my computer, I felt like my mental health got a lot better.
That's my strategy right now too. I've deleted Twitter from the app, and it's just like only on desktop, or only on my laptop, I should say. Like, yeah, that's the way, because Twitter is not real, man. Twitter is just like it's another dimension. Yeah. I mean, during the pandemic, it definitely deteriorated my mental health. I felt like I was in a pretty bad spot. I felt like every little thing, any little move, or any wrong word, any wrong letter that you write, everything is just going to be. Everybody's just fucking on edge, right? It's just like, and people are on edge to like dogpile. It's just pretty crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is your story? Because I remember when we were talking a while back, before you embraced the Magic grind, had you considered becoming a doctor or like studying for something else? Like what was that all about?
Yeah. So I'd say my Magic journey really began. So I had just taken my MCATs. I was at Georgia State University studying to be a doctor. And so I just got my scores, and then I was like, okay, I need to start the application process. But while I was doing that, I had some time off, and I was like, okay, like what are things that I want to engage with? Like I played pickup basketball pretty much every week, if not more than that. And Magic was one of those, secret hobbies that I didn't really tell the person I was dating or my parents. It was just something I just went and did. And I was like, okay, this is my like secret hobby. And I had started going to a bunch of the local tournaments in college. And this is actually how I met Anurag. We're both in
Anurag Das, right?
Yeah. So he was at Tech, which was Georgia State's neighbor. Yeah. So I would go pick him up, and we'd go to the local store, and that's how we kind of just became friends. He didn't have a car, so we would play, and basically I started just winning at the local level, and they just kept urging me to go to the next level, and I ended up like top 8ing an open, and through the journey, basically what ended up happening is I decided that either I was going to make it to the highest level of Magic, or I was going to just quit playing because I wanted to focus on med school. So I ended up giving myself 2 tournaments. There was like a GP in Memphis, Tennessee, and there was a GP in Miami. And so I went to Memphis, and I ended up losing my win-in to Patrick Chapin. And he gave me some good advice. I was playing off the wall deck, and he was like, yeah, you should definitely, keep playing, keep trying hard. You have a really unique deck idea. Anyways, I ended up going to Miami. This is kind of my last tournament. I was like, okay, if I if I top 8, I'll make it to the Pro Tour. I'll continue playing Magic. Otherwise, I'll stop playing. I ended up top 8ing Miami, and then it kind of pushed me into like reconsidering life in that moment. I was like, okay, what should I do from this moment? And I was like, okay, let me focus on school for a little bit. Let me get some of these applications out of the way. While I was doing that, a new set came out, and I basically was like, I think I should go to another Magic tournament and see if I can make it. Since I had top 8'd, it put me in the conversation for Rookie of the Year. And so I decided to go to Paris. I called up my dad and I said, like, you know, I have all my applications good to go. Can I, you know, go on like a trip before, you know, all this, like, things become too hectic. So my dad ended up like buying me a flight using Sky Miles, and kind of got lucky there. Ended up going there, and I ended up losing in the finals, and that kind of chained off into the rest, because I was already like not feeling great about med school. I just felt like if I became a doctor, I wouldn't be a great doctor, because I was just doing this to fulfill my parents' wishes, society's wishes. I felt like everybody was dating me because, like, the girl I was dating me because I was going to become a doctor. My parents
quote unquote
were
successful, right?
Exactly. And stability, and I was a safe person. And even my friends, I felt like they're like, Zan's going to be successful. Not my Magic friends, but just like
your normal friends.
My normal friends.
Yeah.
And I felt I didn't feel like a person. And that's kind of when I, you know, just kind of broke down, and I was just like, okay, what do I want to do? And I really didn't want to be a doctor, and just went to my parents, and that was not a great conversation. And I kind of just hit the reset button, and I was like, okay, can I take all the credits that I have and somehow make use out of it? Because I could finish with this bio degree, or I could go back, take an extra year. And so I switched to finance, and basically took the next year to just travel to Magic tournaments and study finance. That ended up going pretty well. I didn't end up becoming Rookie of the Year, but I ended up like 12th-ing pretty much every single tournament that I played in, and that was like $1,000 or $2,000 every single tournament I went to, which ended up like chaining into like every tournament that I went to was profit or paid for itself. And so I kind of was just like living free off of Magic. And that's kind of when I realized that that I needed other people around me. I needed to build a name for myself, and ended up starting Team Lotus Box because I felt like if I could, you know, share my information with them and kind of create like a philosophy of playing the game in a certain way, that all of us could experience success. But not only that, we could also all take percentages of each other to maximize that none of us end up having a weekend where we don't end up making money. And so, you know, that experiment kind of ended up working. And then in 2019, you know, all of us were qualified for the Players Championship, ended up doing well at the Players Championship, split all that money, and we were just living pretty free off of Magic. And it was kind of like the base that we needed in order to create something more. But due to unforeseen circumstances, which was the pandemic, pretty much all that all that work was shattered. But it was a great life lesson, and I don't think I would have been on the trajectory that I'm at right now if, you know, things didn't fall apart the way that they ended up falling apart.
So many things I want to unpack, but I'll start with one. Going back a little bit, what was your secret sauce for leveling up and doing so well as you did, like on an individual level, like from you know, playing those local events to 12-3ing every event? Like, what do you think was what did you do? Like, what was your mindset? What were the things that helped you get there?
When I found the game and I saw that they had this high level, it kind of like put me in like a weird mind state of that I wanted to be good at this game. And so I just started watching old coverage right before I went to bed, and I would just like leave it on my laptop in front of me. And so I would just wake up in the middle of the night and just be at a random spot in a random pro tour. It was just like absorbing that information. That was the initial thing. But then when I went to the local scene, I didn't go with any friends. So whoever I was playing against, the questions, I would always just like try to put my ego aside and always just ask from their perspective, was there anything that I was doing wrong? And people always had stuff to say. And being just open to that. Then later on, I just would ask people who were standing behind me and watching, because I became friends with them just naturally through that process. I would just ask them, hey, would you have done a different play if you were in my shoes when you were watching? And after when I did that enough and I heard enough thoughts, then I could just apply that by watching other people and watching other matches, and just like basically like hearing everybody's thought process, like, and then asking them why not this way. And yeah, and then there would be moments where it's like a 50-50 decision. Working through that really levels you up, right? So we eventually started getting into Google Hangouts together. And when a bunch of good players or decent players get into Hangouts and we're looking at all of our hands and different positions, it's like you're absorbing like all of these high level situations and hearing different perspectives on what you're supposed to do. Eventually you absorb enough that you get into similar situations, it kind of becomes like a game of chess where Magnus often talks about how he's like not the best puzzle person, but what he has over pretty much everybody else is the amount of time, and his instincts generally just kick in that allow him to like make the right decision. So in Magic, when you're down to the last 5 minutes, you can just like turn to those quick decision making skills, and that ends up letting you win more of the times than your opponent.
Having said all that, are there things that you did or qualities about you like before your Magic career that helped you? Like, for example, in terms of being curious, asking questions, having a sense of humility, like where do you think that stuff comes from?
Well, the humility thing would probably be from like science class. I don't think I was a naturally inclined science student. I would say I was someone who just was willing to outwork people. But you know, I was just willing to raise my hand and get the question wrong, whereas other people I feel like aren't willing to be wrong in those situations. And then the thing that differentiated me from other people has to be probably my ability to build outside the box, and that kind of comes from kind of like a mistake that I had when I was younger, which was I got into Yu-Gi-Oh! Like when Yu-Gi-Oh! Came out first set, in elementary school / middle school. And I would play with my friends and they would constantly beat me. And I couldn't figure out why, but basically the answer was they would look up deck lists online. And I didn't know you could do that. My parents were pretty conservative on how many things I could buy. And so they bought me like a tin box, which came with like 30 packs. And I would just use only the cards in that box to figure out a way to beat people who were basically net decking. And so I remember I went to one of my friend's birthday parties and he had like a tournament and everybody was playing like a really good deck. And I would just play a deck from that. And then I ended up winning. And yeah, I mean, I put myself in such a hard situation that later on when I found Magic, 10 years later, I was still trying to do that. And that ended up allowing me to build stuff, which gives you the higher percentage of winning than pretty much any amount of skill could ever give you.
That's still pretty remarkable because I feel like a lot of people are students of the game and they do these things that you said, but they don't quite get there. So I feel like there's still got to be, and I know it's hard to like ask someone like, how did you become good at it? But there's still got to be like that extra factor somehow, right? Like, what did you do did you just outwork other Magic players was in the end, or like just all things considered?
Well, I mean, a great example is, I was also willing to outwork pretty much everybody. Before the Players Championship, I would say like I was basically playing Magic like 18 hours a day, and I would just fall asleep on my computer, wake up, and just keep playing. And I remember right before decklist submission, my back kind of like gave out and started spazzing, and I had to lay down like right next to my computer, and I had to tell Jeremy or Evan to type up my deck list and submit it, because I just like spent all of those weeks just like basically what I did was we wrote out every single person, what each person was going to play in each format, and then just tested every single situation. And I mean, I would say we guessed to about 90, 95. Like we only missed like one. There's not a single. We wrote down every single person's correct deck, but for some people we had like 2 choices left. And even though we were like, I picked the correct one in terms of 70% and 30% likely to play the other one, we were pretty much right on every single deck. So that's why I would say I stole 95%. So in order to do that, you have to go and check out every single tournament that they've done well with and kind of just like figure out what their range is. And then, it was just like, I'm willing to outwork pretty much everybody. And that's kind of the reason why.
Just a ton of research. Yeah.
And then you give it back to the team, and then you see these are capable players. But now if they have all the data and the best deck, what ends up happening? So basically, there were 8 Lotus Box players, 6 of them which made the Players Championship, 3 of us which ended up making the top 4 and splitting all the money for the Players Championship. It can't get better than that. And Oliver, who ended up winning the tournament, was just playing all of our deck lists. Mm-hmm. Right? So he was essentially, one of our teammates went to go work with Oliver and basically gave him all of gave him a lot of our information. And so it was like, in the end, it was only our decks that were doing well. And we were still willing to give away some of that information. And it would, I would say majority of top Magic players are listening to a very small amount of people, right? And so if you know that a lot of tournaments just come down to preparing for like 3 or 4 rounds, which end up being the reason why you either top 8 or you don't top 8. And so I would say that's become less and less because um, basically basically the skill element of Magic has been kind of diminished, and that's kind of the reason why I've stopped playing as much as I used to, because of cards that kind of break this uh, like fundamental rules of Magic that used to exist. And then on top of that, it is there's just more data, right? Someone can just go and look up how, like, what percentage like a deck is doing better than other decks. So before, when there was just Moto, you could get an edge. Now when there's Arena and Moto, it becomes, there just isn't much flexibility to create something new. There just isn't enough cards. Yeah.
And I know you've been public about it, about the increasing variance in the game. I think that's what I would describe it as, right? Hopefully that's fair. Like just the fact that it is, in your opinion, progressively less skill based because of cards or interactions that make the game evolve in a certain direction. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is. It's. So the answer is a little bit more complicated. The answer is, so when I was streaming, there was a moment where I had broken the format in historic, standard, and alchemy, and basically the deck I had made was the top deck above, what do you call it, the second best deck. And the way you could check that was on Untapped. So basically the top decks in all three formats were my deck, and they were 10% above the second place deck. And then what ended up happening was players started playing my deck, so I ended up just playing the mirror match over and over again. And it's like a really weird scenario. You can't. It's like hard. It's a hard thing to replicate because you have to play so many hours. But when you're streaming 24 or 48 hours, like some crazy streams, you end up being able to accumulate that data. What I ended up realizing is a lot of games came down to the amount of expressive iterations that you cast, right? So let's say I'm playing the mirror match. It no longer mattered if I made more correct decisions than my opponent. If you just took a notepad and said, I cast 2 expressive iterations and they cast 4, they're like, I would win 1 in 10 games where they cast more expressive iterations than me.
Okay.
And so at this point, it's even crazier than that, because
it's more like it's deterministic based on this one factor, right?
Exactly. So now you can be like, okay, let's say I cast expressive iteration and I cast Fable. The person who casts the combination, both of those, is 90% to win the match. And then that's when I was like, okay, like I can't, there's nothing I can do.
It's like, sure, I can get my 4-outer, but I mean that's it, right? It's like 90% of the time I'm not going to get the 4-outer, or whatever analogy to poker, you know?
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so that's when I was like, that's kind of when I feel like this is a good transition. That's kind of when I realized I should offer some solutions to this. And so there were some unique solutions that I talked to the community about. So I would, while I was streaming, I would just be like, oh, hey, what do you guys think of this idea? I don't have the power to change Magic to do this, but what would you think? So one of the solutions was, if, let's say you're playing a monocolored deck, let's say you're playing mono red, that means that you have to start your hand with a basic mountain. So now if you're playing a blue red deck, you have to start your hand with a island and a mountain. And then if you're playing a 3-color deck, let's say it's Abzan, then you have to start with a forest, a swamp, and a plains. And then you would draw your 4 cards. And so this solution, I was like, okay, what do you guys think of this? And people kind of got upset. And I was like, just think about it.
You're breaking a sacred cow of Magic, right? There has to be mana screw. There has to be that kind of variance.
Yeah, but we could eliminate that, but we could also play more cards. So if you really think about it, you could play a 5-color deck because you would start with 5 basics in your opening hand, and you would draw 2 cards to accompany that, right? What that would mean is the rest of your deck could just be all cards. You wouldn't need to play any more lands.
Right.
Right? But let's say you're playing a blue-red deck. You could play an island and you would get that island and a mountain, but the rest of your deck, there could be more utility lands. You would never get mana screwed. You'd at least be able to play the game. And then on top of that, what you would do is you would create more slots to play more of the cards that we've never seen in standard or modern. It'd be like the equivalent of every deck kind of being a Yorion style deck without it being a Yorion style deck.
Yeah. It's like lands as companions, or like there's a guarantee that you can cast those spells of each color. Yeah.
But it also promotes the original intention of Magic, which was color fixing, right? Since you have these basic lands, then what do you call it? It's not like you can play Archmage's Charm, right? Unless you're playing the mono blue deck. You still, and it's not like you can double spell easily in the 5-color deck where you go like Growth Spiral and Izzet Charm, because there's a blue overlap, because the color fixing is actually being applied. On top of that, like let's say you're thinking about Legacy, right? If you think about like a combo deck in Legacy, which splashes green, splashing a color now has a huge cost because you have to start your hand with a forest. Or a wasteland is no longer as insane because everybody starts with basics in their opening hand. And so this was like one of the suggestions, and people kind of got really mad at me. There was a lot of outrage about it. And so after when I was like, I felt like after when I hit number 1 in like every category, I was like, there's not much I can do. And so my mind naturally started thinking about these things. And eventually the conclusion became, oh, I'm just supposed to make my own game. If I'm trying to make my own game, what should I do? And so I ended up just writing out what the game would be. And then I just made all the cards, and not all of the cards, but kind of like the fundamental amount of cards that you would need to play a match. And that's when I ended up going to New York to write out the rest of the game, and also go to Syracuse to show it to some other, pro Magic players. Rossum was one of them. I basically picked the most pessimistic person I could think of, who was John Rossum. And I was like, okay, if he thinks this is interesting, this is worth my time. If he doesn't think it's interesting, then this was a nice trip visiting my sister and then visiting my parents.
So you convinced John that this was something worthwhile, or he convinced you, or confirmed it, I guess.
Yeah, he just came back the next day and wanted to play, and then the next day he wanted to play again, and I was like, okay, he would never come back and want to play not Magic at a Magic tournament if he didn't think it was interesting. So when I went to Atlanta, yeah, go ahead.
So you created a new card game. Is that it?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What state of development is it in? Is it like ready for prime time? Is it like what or can you talk about it in that way, or?
Yeah. So basically what ended up happening. Okay, so yeah, so the name of the game is Zodiac. It's Zodiac themed. And it's like 12 pre-constructed decks. The stage that it's in, I finished the game in terms of if we could play in paper, but the idea is I want it to be on primarily mobile. And so I was like, okay, what's the best route for that? And it ended up being starting a startup. And so we started going down that route. There's an incubator that we joined out here in Atlanta, but basically we ended up hiring a full development team in India 10 weeks ago. Well, that was 11 weeks ago, and we just finished week 10 of development. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's coming along pretty good. I would say, what is it? It's currently March. We are planning to go to India April 20th and basically spend 2 weeks before they give us a finished product. So it'll be like May 5th-ish is when we're aiming to have like our full alpha stage product.
Awesome. So it'll be available later in the year for people to potentially try.
Yeah. So right now I have like a small testing team of Magic players and other card game players that have been testing it on Tabletop Simulator. But yeah, I mean, we're making the mobile game on Unreal Engine, so it's gonna look completely different. So I mean, like, yeah, it's just been a whirlwind of events, but yeah.
Well, without having actually played Zodiac, I gotta say you're probably one of the more interesting people to attempt a card game, because one thing that always struck me is that in our conversations, whether it's about content or Magic or other things, like you always struck me as being very multidisciplinary, if that's a word. I guess it is, but I'm not sure if it's accurate. But it's like you always seem to be inspired by a lot of things around you that are not necessarily like in the Magic box. So I think that actually gives you a bit of an edge, in addition to being a very high level Magic player, or were a high level Magic player. But the question here is, you know that there's a lot of card games that have been attempted in recent years. There's been like probably one notable one that's been quite successful, which is Flesh and Blood. That claims to be a little bit lower variance, maybe ticks those boxes. At least when I talk to players who are high level Flesh and Blood players, and you're inspired by a lot of things around you, like in terms of just other genres of games as well, right? So. Are you considering all of those things when it comes to building this game, right? I guess it's a very like open-ended question.
Yeah, Fab is a wonderful game. So I mean, part of the journey was, I mean, I didn't really want to make a card game, to be honest. It just kind of felt like when I was suggesting these things for Magic, it just all of a sudden I just had a core of a game that could be good, and then it was just okay. Let me just apply these theories to a game, and then it just kind of kept escalating. I also didn't want to do a startup, but it was the natural way to fund a mobile game, and so it just kind of kept going in that direction. So, it wasn't really like a forced situation. I also think that so let's say the pandemic happened. The pandemic happened right at, like, let's say I started making a card game at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't think I had the insight to make a card game, and it was streaming that actually allowed me to figure pretty much everything out. I think that your mindset as a pro player, and then your mindset as someone who's trying to reach a normal audience, or someone who's like playing the game for the first time, is different. I kind of lost track. What was the original question again?
No problem. So I guess, how inspired are you by other games that around you in terms of creating Zodiac?
So much. I would say a lot of it was actually, there's a huge piece of it that comes from chess. There's a huge portion of the game that comes from chess. There, I really like the idea of X amount of pieces being same for both players, X amount of cards. And then we have like this phase, it's called the eclipse phase, where when you run out of cards, basically all of your cards gain like Yog. Do you know what Yawgmoth's will does?
Yeah, they basically get it's like Breach, right? You can replay them.
Yeah, you can basically replay all those cards, and once you use them there, they end up exiling. So there isn't really a way to, what do you call it, to finish in a draw, and it's a best of one. But the major difference is in Magic, even if you have like the best deck, your win rate is probably not going to be above 70-75% if you have like one of the most broken decks of that time. In this game, if you are the better player, you're gonna win 95. If you make more correct decisions, you don't even have to be the better player, because a not better player can make more correct decisions. You're gonna win about 95% of the time. But not only that, when we were talking about expressive iteration and those cards, they break this rule, and I would say this is like the most important like theory that I want to apply to like it could be applied to pretty much any game, and it's called like the equivalent exchange theory. Basically expressive iteration is like 2 cards, right, for the cost of 1. Elvish Visionary is probably one of the earlier cards that kind of breaks it. You get a 1/1 and then you draw a card, and so you end up like breaking equivalent exchange. Not only does that break equivalent exchange, but like drawing a card for your turn would be breaking equivalent exchange. And so something that's like a feature in Zodiac is you don't draw a card per turn. You draw a card whenever you play an action, and that kind of like let's say you cast an instant or a sorcery. Every card would say draw a card after it, but you wouldn't draw a card at the beginning of your turn. And so it keeps this like parity of like both players are always drawing a card, but there are no cards that gain you more card advantage than kind of your opponent. And so what it ends up being about is about the decisions you make, rather than who ends up drawing more of those cards that would essentially double up. Plus, you can't get you can't really get mana screwed or flooded in this game. Lands have more application, and then also you start with what do you call it? You start with 2 lands in your opening hand. Lands are called gemstones because the zodiacs have gemstones associated with them, so stuff like that.
And also it's copyrighted in Magic, I assume, like tapping and mana and all that stuff, so you gotta go a different lane.
Of course.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask the devil's advocate question, right? Well, I have 2. One is, are you worried about the game becoming too far on the skill axis? Because Magic has always thrived on being, or I should say a game that has mass appeal thrives on having some element of randomness or comebackness, if that's a word, like be able to come back. Now you mentioned the expressive iteration thing being an example of not coming back, but I think in general there are games that are still embraced because they have more random number generator elements to it. So are you worried about that when it comes to Zodiac?
Well, I mean, that's
or it's okay because I'm just gonna make the game that I'm gonna make my vision, right?
No. That's a great question. So, right now we're definitely in this vague era of games, and this honestly comes down to the monetization system, right? So the so how do I describe this? Okay, so the monetization system is kind of like, it's kind of like not like a league, but imagine that you have an 8-player pod where you're playing in a single elimination tournament, right? If you're playing in a pod and each player puts in $1, let's say we end up giving first place $3, and then we end up giving second place $2, and we end up giving third and fourth place $1. That's $7 that's redistributed to the top four people, and our company ends up taking that dollar. What that's creating is a system where, like, the game has more meaning in terms of, like, if you learn to make the correct decisions, the reward will like help you out monetarily. Right now, I think that there's a lot of things in the gaming culture that aren't like there's no stakes. So if someone makes a mistake, it can kind of be brushed under the rug. So if you can imagine a world where you apply this monetization model to every game, like let's say you apply it to Fortnite or League of Legends, right? In League of Legends, there's a culture of running it down, where people have accounts and there's no need for accountability. Where, let's say, people tune in for a match and one person ends up leaving or ends up running to the other team and basically sacrificing themselves just because they're having a bad time. They lost nothing doing it because it's a free account, and losing the match has no real downside, and they're kind of like just done playing the game. But the moment that they have $1 on the line, there's a amount of there's like an accountability portion that they cannot, if they just throw it, they're just throwing away $1. And the moment you have $1 in it, that kind of just all goes away. And so if you apply this across the board, it will create a culture where things will be pushed in the direction of more similar to sports, where the community is looking for everybody, the person who's making more correct decisions. So you can imagine people watching streams to become better, and that will directly translate in making more money. But it's, and so
you're basically saying it's okay to be more on the skill axis if you have the right incentives. Like if you created more like basically like the poker model, where it's like your money is literally on the line, so you will be incentivized to make the best decisions possible. Basically, like making every match of Magic a money match or a money draft kind of thing.
Exactly. There will still be like a free play, because I think that sandboxes should always exist. You should be always able to test whatever idea you have or whatever style of play you want to make. But making the correct decision like translates in so many different ways. In a way, I think that it was kind of the real education that I needed. I think I ended up, during the pandemic, I ended up getting diagnosed with ADD, and that's something that I didn't realize growing up. But the thing that could hold my attention was games. And so I really truly feel like Magic gave me an alternative education and a way to make decisions more clearly. So when I ended up taking this path and I needed to catch up on the startup world, it was much easier for me to read the books that I needed to read, to make the decisions that I needed to make in order to get to this point. And I think that games are kind of like a microcosm of the world, right? And if you can figure out how to like succeed in that small microcosm, then it's much easier to navigate like the huge world, right? And so it's just, games currently, the way that they make money is from microtransactions, and basically they treat people kind of like cows, where they're like, okay, let's try to get as much as we can get out of them before they wake up. And Magic at some level started doing similar practices, if not worse, where one of Magic's beauties is that you can build any deck that you want to. But at this time, it's like you can build any deck if you want to for $1,000, and losing that creativity is really sad. Like, I think that Magic, the reason why it's been so successful is because it's the best card game, and it always has been. But at the end of the day, it's just a formula that we just need to apply it again and kind of just escape the corporate entity that has taken over it.
Yeah. So this goes to my next question. Is the other devil's advocate question is there have been a lot of people who have been intense into Magic that said, I don't like these things about Magic. I don't like A, B, and C. I don't like X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to go and make my own game. And some of them are pretty good, like Fab, we talked about. Some of them have not succeeded. So are you aware of, those dynamics? Because like there have been many people that have come before you that basically are saying like a variation of what you said. I don't like Magic. I want to do it this other way. Yet somehow Magic is still the dominant card game, at least. So is that something that, like, I'm not trying to poo-poo like anyone trying to do anything new or create, like, don't get me wrong, like that, give you my background, like that's definitely not where I'm coming from. You should always be like building and creating new things and trying. But is that something that is in the back of your mind as well?
100%. I mean, I think that the doubt needs to exist in order for it to be motivation, and in order, like, the doubt is always there, right? Like we're our harshest critics, 100%. In terms of other people doing it, I feel like, honestly, there wasn't a need for it for the longest period of time, right? When it was just Moto and Arena didn't exist and Hearthstone didn't exist, Magic wasn't being pushed into the direction that it's in. So I think that Hearthstone in a way was good for Magic because it pushed Magic to actually make the thing that it did. But at this point, they're both pretty much the same. And they've gone down this rabbit hole of just trying to extract as much money as they can out of each person. And they've applied a bit of League of Legends tactics, which are like when a new character comes out in League of Legends, it has to be more powerful than everything else, and that kind of like then they'll nerf it, or the next thing will come out and they'll keep happening. And once Magic and Hearthstone started doing that as well, everything that you bought ended up having like less value. So I think that what Fab has done is like really spectacular. I think the reason why that they were so successful is because they're based out of New Zealand, and so having that like area that didn't have Magic's exposure and not in the primary breeding ground of Magic allowed it to have a base that didn't need to respond to the Magic the Gathering base, which is the US, right? Just like that, I think that them waiting before they came to the US and having a great product and it being successful, and then coming to the US with that already successful product allowed it to continue to succeed. And I think that like a lot of my inspiration came from Fab, and then also Lost Ark, which is the Korean MMO, which came out, I think, 3 years before it came out in the US. It's a pretty genius approach to, they know that the US audience is hypercritical of any new game that comes out. And when it has bugs, this audience doesn't allow it to get to, like, doesn't help it, doesn't nurture it.
There's no grace period, right? Yeah,
exactly. And they just completely destroy it. So Lost Ark, they didn't even, they waited until they had the perfect game, no bugs, nothing. 3 years after that, they launched during the pandemic, and it ended up surpassing WoW and Final Fantasy for a couple of weeks, but they ended up falling back down, but still that's like not an easy feat. They're still one of the highest grossing games of pretty much all time. But just like that, I think that my primary audience, my first breeding ground, the reason why I'm actually going to India is because India never had that Pokemon renaissance. And when you look at even the World Cup for Magic, there was no India team. But India houses more than a seventh of the world's population, right? And we know that they have a high amount of mobile game players. They actually have second to China, but within the next 5 years, they're number one. But at the same time, China does a great job at having their in-house companies reach the mobile gamers of its own audience, whereas India has failed to do that. India has always been influenced by the West, right? And a major thing that you can see is the chess community in India is absolutely insane. So they believe in that fundamental of getting better at something, and that translating into more wins. I mean, I think that they have the most grandmasters currently, or like they're either second or like they just have like a massive community where I've seen like comedians who have turned to chess streaming.
Word.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that have turned to chess streaming and have become like multi-million subscriber YouTube channels. And so I think that a card game that the base is India, like if I'm able to reach even 0.1% of their base, that will be more than the amount of Magic players that exist. And so I also think that, the monetization model that I touched on briefly, the idea is like, let's say I wake up in middle of India and all I have is my cell phone and $50 worth of credit on this game, that I should be able to use the skills to get myself out of that situation. I wish it was possible to implement this on chess, but the thing is, chess engines exist, so it doesn't allow for a fair playing field. I also believe that people shouldn't be always paired against someone who is similar elo. I think that you should be dropped into a pool where it's kind of like the real world. It's kind of like a poker tournament where you can get paired against either a whale or a fish, any type of person, and they don't know what you are and you don't know what they are. With that being said, I think that the card game has a shot in India, at least.
Yeah, I mean, start in India and expand, right? But definitely don't forget about China either, as you mentioned. Like, it is
100%.
up there in terms of games. They have no history with Magic, barely any. That I know now, having a lot of history with League and other games. But that it might also be a good place to potentially go sometime.
No, 100%. I mean, I just it's so much easier since I can speak the language and our development teams there. It makes it easier, but of course I want to go to China. Of course I want to go to the US, but it was like really important that I pick one market, and I even considered Pakistan or Dubai, but like their mobile game users were just not like as untouched as India, surprisingly.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're aware of this as well, is that every decision you make from a game design perspective is just about trade-offs. Like, yeah, you could say that, I don't want to have a ladder, or I don't want to be more on this skill versus like luck axis. And there have been literally millions of people that come before us that have like analyzed everything. They try like like tweaking these knobs differently in games, and they come up with different results. And of course, in the end, it's like any technology or anything, right? It's like it comes out and you don't really have any control over it. The market will, in the end, dictate it, but you try to put your best foot forward, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's impossible to know what the right answer is. Like, we have a couple of advisors, and we've had like a couple of fundamental disagreements on the way the monetization model is going to be implemented. But at the end of those conversations, we're like, you know, the market will determine which one ends up being the right one. None of us know. We're just going to follow the data once the data starts being accumulated by the mass amount of people once our alpha launches.
Nice. So what is something, I mean, you've been a leader before that, whether it's Team Lotus Box or other settings, but like, what is something about running this startup and building this thing? Like, what is something new that you've learned in the last little while?
Something new that I've learned.
Maybe like a key lesson that a key level up or a key lesson.
I mean, you kind of just don't know where you're going to end up. Like, if you told me that I would have stopped playing Magic at the end of 2019 and then decided to make my own card game or was going down the startup route, I wouldn't really have believed you. Or I just think that, you know, kind of like, you just have to be willing to go with wherever like the wind is willing to take you, and then just try to make as many right decisions as you can, knowing that you're going to make a lot of wrong decisions along the way, but learn from them and just, you know, you just got to keep moving forward. Things are going to be bad. I'll wrap it up with I'll wrap this thought up with the rule of thirds. I think that if you're doing something that, like, whenever you're doing something, as long as like you're happy 33% of the time, and you feel nothing 33% of the time, and you feel sad or like disheartened 33% of the time, like, I think that balance is as long as you have that and it's like not tilting in any direction, I feel like you have the ability to keep moving forward, or that you're on the right track at least.
Holy crap, I love that. I've never heard that before, and I'm just thinking of it applied to what I'm doing now, or maybe what I was doing previously with startups. Like, that is so true. That is, like, I guess things are either like pretty bad or pretty neutral. Like, I guess it's never been really good, at least in my experience. Maybe it's also like how I'm wired mentally, but that's a good perspective. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's definitely not mine. Definitely, I think one of our advisors said it, or something I was reading said it. But wherever I heard it, it just kind of just stuck with me. Also, use Notion. I think that Notion has really changed my life.
Notion is awesome. Yeah. What's like one of the, man, this is also a cliche question, but I really want to know. What's the biggest challenge you've had so far in this startup journey?
Biggest challenge. So basically when I Jeremy, who was on Team Lotus Box with me, is actually my co-founder. So he had flown out to LA, 3 months of nonstop testing, and then I kind of was like, okay, we have to go down the startup route. What is the first step we have to take? And so a really tough decision was I needed to stop paying rent in LA, and I just needed to pack up my car and move back to Atlanta, moving in with my parents. And that was really tough because I felt like I can still make everything work in LA, but the reason why I would be staying would be because of my ego, because how could I move back in with my parents? But in terms of what's the right play in order for this startup to have the highest chance of success, it's what I like have to do. Like, I needed to do it, and I needed to put my ego aside and just get in the car and drive back. And that's what I ended up doing. But the biggest ego check was definitely when we walked into the incubator the first day, and it's like a entrepreneurial hour with a lot of like really successful people, and they kind of asked they asked us what our company was, what it was about. It's kind of like a like a like a
Like pitch yourself, basically. Like introduce yourself. What are you about, right?
Exactly. And they completely destroyed us, where there was a lot of points at which I couldn't answer those questions. And I remember I have a couple of friends that are also in various startups and have been for the past couple of years. And I hit them up. They sent me a list of books, and I just like read Angel. I read I have this long list of books, but I just started reading books.
Lean Startup, like there's a whole bunch of like Bibles, I guess, in that industry. Yeah,
exactly. Because I didn't know what the terminology was, so I felt like I couldn't translate a lot of the things to them, and I also hadn't worked it out in a way that is appropriate for, like, I might be doing it right for a card game player, but I'm not doing it right for like the average person or someone who might be interested in investing, but just can't because I haven't been able to reach them. So them completely tearing me down, but then coming back the next week and trying to answer the questions better, and then coming back the next week and next week and next week. I would say, just willing to start over again, even though we had like a pretty built out thing with Team Lotus Box. You're never big enough to hit the reset button.
That's always the toughest thing to do, because I know you have been in the past like very entrenched in Magic, right? I dare say it was probably a big part of your identity, right? I mean, I think a lot of people I've talked to on this podcast, that has definitely been the case. Like most of your life, a lot of your your meaningful years on the planet have been like Magic related, right? To exaggerate a little bit, but certainly I felt that in the past. I felt like Magic was a big part of who I was, good or bad, good and bad, good, bad, ugly, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard. Like I just, there are a lot of people today that like, sometimes I look at what they're doing and it's like, should they really be doing Magic? Like, it's sort of like, I'm doing Magic because there's nothing else I can do. And I always felt like you sort of transcended that. So I'm glad you're going in this new direction. I just feel like it's always tough, right? It's always tough to make changes, Magic related or not. So,
I mean, it's life. They're just changes in life. And I think that I don't look back at my time with Magic in regret. I often look back and there was a moment in all of it which helps me with pretty much every situation that I'm dealing with now. There's just so much, I think, but I do think that at times I feel bad because I feel like, let's say Magic had the same system as poker. I think that a lot of those people that are now, kind of stranded and left on an island with just Magic, I feel like those skills should be able to translate. It's like being a professional athlete, but you can't, you're not allowed to, like, there's not like a league for you, right? Like you don't have an option to go play in Australia if you didn't get into the NBA, or go to China, or go to the Euro League, right? Like Magic just doesn't really have that. I think the closest thing is poker itself, but that's still a reset button, because Alex might be doing well but
this is Alex Berncini, right? Just to clarify.
Yeah, might be doing well in poker now, but there was a lot of moments in that transition from Magic to poker where he really struggled. He called me and he was just like, I'm miserable, I'm losing a lot, and hitting a reset button on something with that much variance and not being able to translate Magic purely is, I think it's sad. I think that what I'm trying to build will help alleviate that, because I really do think that like Magic has like the essence of something that needs to exist, and it just hasn't been like fully utilized. And let's see if we can make that happen.
Just a totally like off the wall thought as well. This is kind of a software analogy, but is there a future where like Magic, obviously it's very difficult because Wizards owns the IP, but could there be a future where the game engine is like open sourced, where then you could apply your different rule sets and have your own like leagues and tournaments and things like that? Have you ever thought about that? I'm maybe you have, but of course this is wishful thinking, right? But I think about everything that we just talked about, and like if Magic the game is still so solid, like is that a potential future? Could that happen somehow? I don't know. Like, do you have to be a billionaire and just like buy the IP out from Wizards so they can go indie? Like, I don't know what would have to happen.
Yeah, I mean, something that I don't say often. I have said it to a couple of people. I'll say it because I feel like the moment calls for it. Like I feel like, let's say this route or whatever route in my life ends up being successful, I will go back and buy Magic, and I do want to kind of set it free. I think that that there is potential for that, but as far as right now goes, I don't think that there's a chance. I mean, the only thing that I heard that could result in that would probably be I don't know if you remember, John Finkel was trying to get his firm to
own a controlling stake in Wizards or Hasbro, something like that.
Exactly. So that could have been a move, but also it's hard to predict. Those are profit-driven motives, so I can't imagine that it was to set it free.
So it's like absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it's like you might come in with a certain intention, and it ends up not being that way, right?
Yeah, because I'm not sure if it would give John the entire power. I don't think he was the CEO or residing over that firm or whoever the main controlling person is. But I think that it's going to take $1 billion, or probably more by the time.
Not to wish any corporate entity any ill will, but maybe just a few down quarters and that valuation would go down, and maybe then things might be different, right?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely seems like it's headed that way. But let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are you completely removed from Magic now? Are you no longer involved in any shape or capacity, or do you still fire up the old Magic Online once in a while just to play?
No, I do still play Magic. I did play some today. I'm actually qualified for the RC in San Diego. So,
nice.
Mm-hmm. So I'll be going to that. But in terms of like, I don't really play weekly. I don't really play on the weekends. I played like one RC and I ended up winning it. And then I love California and I miss it. And plus Anurag was going, so I felt like it was worth my time.
Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, shout out to the First Strike podcast, those boys in Canada. I listened to their podcast recently, and I think it was Derek or Misplaced Ginger that just went off on saying like all Magic players are terrible, as he usually likes to say. All the decent Magic players in the game no longer care about Magic or play about Magic, so therefore all Magic players are terrible. And is there any hot take time? Is there any truth to that? Because you're no longer like active in the game so much, and a lot of your peers, I'll call them, are no longer as active, or they're kind of like, I guess what he was implying is that people are just kind of dialing it in when they show up for RCQs or RCs now. Is there some sort of like truth to that claim?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there is truth to that. A lot of players have quit, especially in terms of like the paper scene. I mean, Misplaced Ginger usually is like giving safe hot takes, I would say. Like okay. Even though it sounds outrageous in terms of
true.
Magic Twitter, yeah. It is outrageous. But it's just like I watched a little bit of standard coverage today. I would say I don't think that there was a round that I saw where people were not making some pretty massive misplays. So, yeah, and yeah, just the incentive has just kind of gone away. It's not as much as it used to be. There used to be like an overarching narrative for someone to need to do well in order to achieve something more than that. So that kind of only comes about RCs and then PTs. And even then a lot, like, it comes down to a combination of things. A lot of times players who do make mistakes, they're not punished because at the end of the day, if you do more expressive iterations, you're still going to win. So it's hard to figure out, like, the game isn't telling you anymore that a mistake is actually bad. It's more so telling you that drawing better is more important than any mistake you could ever make.
Mm. Another point that he made, and I'm so sorry, Derek, if you're definitely probably not listening to this, but because I just listened to the podcast last night, but that's why it's fresh in my mind. Like, he was also saying that, you know, all the good players in Canada are kind of like centered around Toronto. Mm-hmm. And so who the heck is going to like travel to Vancouver for like you have to really want it to like travel to Vancouver now to like play in another one of these qualifiers. And he was just saying like the skill level that he saw in Vancouver was like a lot weaker than Toronto, just because like who would be it's about incentives. Like, so that's also like super interesting. And I have no idea if this is like, I'm not in that world, but I'm just curious, like, if you have any thoughts on my paraphrased take.
Well, Vancouver is actually where my first Pro Tour was, and I have cousins in Vancouver and in Toronto. I think that Vancouver is like honestly a prettier and cleaner LA. So I think that if like traveling...
I'm from Vancouver, by the way, so I totally 100% agree with that.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I freaking love it.
Yeah, I'm Canadian. I grew up in Vancouver. Like, I was in Vancouver. I've been in Vancouver since like '89. I'm in China now, but I that's my home. So
yeah, I would say Toronto is so much worse than Vancouver. It's not even close. So I think that's
don't say anything bad about Toronto just on my account. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not your account. I mean, traveling to both many times. I mean, I always had different experiences, but I would say, like, it's like traveling to California from Atlanta now. It's, what do you call it? Like, that used to be one of the whole reasons why you wanted to play in the Pro Tour, is to travel to places. So I think that I wouldn't necessarily agree with not wanting to go to Vancouver.
All right. So, Zan, this has been an awesome conversation, man. I just want to give you a little bit of space here. If you want to, is there anything that you want to plug, like in terms of telling people about your project or about where the people can find your work, or like anything of that kind?
I mean, yeah, if you want to follow me at Zan_Syed, these days I'm not really trying to grow any of those, but eventually when the game comes out, then I will kind of have to. I just prefer not to be front facing if I don't have to.
Fine, stealth mode for a while. Well, that's good. That's good. Keep it low key until things are ready. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I mean, I love the conversation, and I mean, I've always thought of you as kind of like an older brother figure, and you've always been really nice to me, and yeah, thanks again.
I appreciate that, and I gotta end with like one story, right? It's just involving you and I. When I said you were generous, I was not joking, right? Because I mean, full disclosure, you know, you have helped with my venture in the past, Cardboard Life. Mm-hmm. But also, like, I remember when I was just starting to get into Magic Online, because I was very late to it. I was one of the people that learned Magic Online like just a couple years back, and I still remember, I didn't take you up on this offer, but I think at the time it was like right after like Lotus Box had cracked Modern, and I think Urza was already banned, and a lot of things were happening, and I was wanting to like start playing that format. And you were really like generous. You just said, "Hey James, like if you want, I can lend you any deck you want," and just on Moto. And I didn't actually take you up on that offer because I was afraid of my addictive personality and getting really sucked into a format and just never leaving. But I've always like you always give me good vibes, right? Just on the record, like I always felt like you've always been kind of generous, and of course, Anurag is by now like a really good friend of mine as well. I actually recently had a super deep dive on him on this podcast, like just in terms of how he does all the coverage stuff, and it was just like it's just nice to get all that behind the scenes stuff. So I'm really this is kind of full circle, man. I'm really really glad that you took the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no, thanks again for having me. Yeah, I appreciate it.